Margaret. I now call on Senator Neil O'Donnell. Senator, you have 8 minutes.
Early agus aire to fáilte road Tammy Buick and Shah Lordlad agus and Raktiak Tawak Tak Shaw Flay. Minister, you're very welcome to the Shannon, and I welcome the opportunity to discuss this important piece of legislation before us today. And like other colleagues, Sinn Féin will be supporting the legislation, although we do have an amendment, and I'll speak to that amendment in the course of these remarks, so I don't have to necessarily repeat myself at a further stage. And I agree with the speakers who have expressed the sentiment around the need to try and effectively clear the backlog. And obviously we are dealing with an emergency health situation. And I suppose what we agreed, or certainly we had the understanding that we wouldn't go through the normal process of pre-leg scrutiny around this in order to try and deal with those concerns around enabling our courts and those who are working within the criminal justice system, because it was to deal with that COVID-19 emergency. There are, however, more fundamental issues of reform contained within the bill, and that's not to say that we oppose them. We don't necessarily, but they do come from outside that scenario, and it's because of that that the amendment, in the same way we're seeking to greater enable the criminal justice system to do their job, the purpose of the amendment that sets a sunset clause effectively seeks to enable us to do our job as legislators better. So it would give us the opportunity to review these important changes and to look at them again. Hopefully, God spares us in the context where we don't have the same acute emergency situation around the COVID-19 crisis. So, I would urge colleagues to reflect on that. There are, as has rightly been said, the important aspects of this bill that need to go through, that we support and endorse, and there is consensus around the Chamber and between the groups in relation to that. But there are other issues here, and I just think we need to be very alert. And I raised it here, Minister, it's a somewhat separate point, but I raised it here last week that, and Senator Ward touched on it, the issue of how we're doing our business at the moment. So we did concede that there wouldn't be pre-leg scrutiny around this. We are taking all stages. We are seeing aspects of the bill that don't necessarily or shouldn't pertain to the COVID-19 crisis. So I don't think it would do any harm for us to come back in the same way, actually, that the health legislation, the emergency legislation around health, that mammoth piece of work is rightly coming back for review in November. I don't think it would do any harm for us to take that same considered approach to get a look at it once again. So, as I said, Minister, we'll be supporting the bill, and as has been said, it's our understand that further reforms in this area will be introduced by you later in the year, which is important, necessary and welcome, Minister. As I said, however, legislation is being rushed through the Houses with the volume and speed that it has been in the last number of weeks, and that should give us all cause for concern. We understand the reasons why, but that's not to say we shouldn't be alert and enable ourselves to come back and look at that again. I also understand that some of the bills are urgent, obviously, and I take that point, and we have sought to be as collaborative and cooperative with other groups as we can to try and assist government where that emergency legislation is relevant and needed. I do want to make the point, Minister, that I acknowledge and agree around the need for more coroners, and that's to be welcomed, especially if the additional resources will mean that inquests such as that of the Stardust victims will not be further delayed by extra strain on the coroners due to this pandemic. The families of victims of Stardust, and indeed many other families who are awaiting inquests for their loved ones, shouldn't have to wait for so long to have these matters dealt with. 2 years of a backlog is very stressful for any family of a lost loved one to endure. In particular, as I mentioned, the Stardust families who have been campaigning for many years for justice now and await a date for a fresh inquest. And I want to, Minister, pay a special tribute to the late Christine, affectionately known as Chrissy Keegan, who passed away just recently and who tirelessly spent almost 40 years along with her daughter Antoinette campaigning for a fresh inquest into the disaster that took the lives of two of her daughters, Martina and Mary, and so many others. So I hope that these measures do help, and I hope that we'll see further reforms soon to resolve such resourcing issues in this area, so that families don't have to suffer the stress of long backlogs any further. That's the real human impact and need that's out there, and why we need to move on this. So whilst many of the provisions in the bill, Minister, allow for practical solutions during Covid-19, and they should be welcomed as they can assist the legal profession to operate in what are unprecedented and difficult circumstances. I do note that the changes in Part 4 of the bill that deals with criminal law procedures, sections 23 and 24, are sought to be permanent reforms. So this will allow for the use of video links at pre- and post-trial hearings, such as when seeking bail, free legal aid or sentence hearings. And while I accept that this would not be used during the trial itself, there is some body of evidence out there that suggests that even in those stages in the process, an accused person might be at a disadvantage to have certain matters decided over video link. I do of course recognise that these measures during the pandemic would prevent the transferring of prisoners, which might cause more harm than good for everyone involved, and keeping the prisons COVID-free is absolutely a must. But these reforms are not just to prevent the spread of Covid-19, they are reforms for the future, and that raises the need for more care and more attention as we move ahead. I think we can all relate to how things go on our own Zoom meetings, and how many of those have we been on lately where engagement just isn't always the same as a face-to-face meeting, and nuances can of course be missed. So there are legitimate, I think, concerns as to why we need to look at that again. That's not to say, Minister, there aren't benefits in using video links, and likewise with other provisions in the bill for civil cases, and in the short term during this pandemic more so. But we haven't had enough time to scrutinise the devil in the detail of the bill to be sure in our own minds that we're doing the right thing and protecting human rights. I believe the reforms in this area are absolutely well intended, and certainly we want to enable the courts to deal with the backlog and for everyone to stay safe at the same time. But the real issue here is the absence of real and proper legislative scrutiny for such serious and fundamental reforms in our justice system. This bill would only have contained temporary measures. This bill should have only contained temporary measures necessary at this time. So indeed, if everything in the bill was a temporary measure to deal with constraints during Covid-19, there would be no issue, and I don't see why the reforms being promised later in the year can't incorporate the reforms here in this bill in order to avoid the unnecessary situation of hastily passing some of the reforms, where instead we have to have a more considered, thought-out and nuanced approach to the passing of emergency legislation. Minister, as I said, I wish you well. I don't want to be a hindrance to the important aspects of this bill, but I do think there is legitimacy in the amendment, and I would ask colleagues and you to reflect on the need for that review.
Agreed. Could I ask the acting leader, when is it proposed to take committee stage? No. Agreed? Agreed. Okay. Committee stage. Section 1, Amendment 1, in the name of Senator Neil O'Donnell. The question. Senator.
This amendment in my earlier contribution, and I just want to begin by saying, Minister, that the kind of make-up of the spokespeople on justice has changed in this Senate term, as has the Minister. But it was my experience, both in terms of sitting on the Justice Committee and holding this brief for Sinn Féin in the last Senate, that by and large we did work very collaboratively. We did engage with each other, and we didn't fall into the more common, maybe combative back and forward that you would see in relation to other issues. So certainly from my perspective, that's how I'll approach this term, and I look forward to that same spirit prevailing with other colleagues right across the chamber, and with yourself too, Minister, because I think that's important until such times where it is absolutely necessary. I think we have shown that we can work together, because very much of the legislation that we will deal with is about people keeping people safe, and we can agree on that. Minister, I don't want to delay this legislation, and it's important to say that my amendment doesn't seek to do that, nor would it delay the legislation if passed here today. It wouldn't succeed in doing that, because that's not what it's about. It's really about adding a punctuation point for us as legislators. It's about allowing us the opportunity in the context of the Covid-19 dynamic that we are in the context of, as you rightly acknowledge, that this legislation hasn't passed through the normal standards of parliamentary scrutiny. It allows us and affords us that opportunity should we need it, and there's nothing to say that we do, but should we need it, there is the opportunity there to stop, take a breather and look at this again, because as other colleagues have referred to, and that's the point, I suppose, of the amendment, is that there is more to this legislation now than simply the Covid-19 emergency response. And as I say, while I don't necessarily take issue with those proposals, I just don't think it would do any harm in the absence of the earlier scrutiny and in the more rushed form of protocol here today. I don't think it would do us any harm to revisit that and look at it again. So this isn't about being obstructive. This is actually, I think, about strengthening and further enabling this legislation in the form of taking that opportunity to look again at it and make it better and make it stronger for all of the reasons outlined by myself, by the other speakers, and indeed even more reasons than that, again, to ensure that the change that's needed, that's being sought, that's being asked for, can be the very best change that it can be. Thank
you, Senator Neil O'Donnell.
And with such an inspiring rallying call, how could I not? So thanks for that, Senator Boyan. And just to respond, I hear Senator Ward, and as I say, my experience again previously in relation to justice matters is that they have been conversational. We have engaged with each other and listened to each other and spoken out on matters that we feel strongly about. I would probably concede your point more broadly if the bill presented to us today, and certainly the way it was being presented to us previous to today, pertained solely to the issue of the Covid-19 emergency and other such crises and emergency situations. But, for example, Barry, Chapter 3 has nothing to do with the emergency measures, and it should have been subjected to pre-laid scrutiny. So that is one of the reasons why I don't think there's any harm in us adding that punctuation point, that breathing space for us down the line. And as Victor has eloquently said, if it comes back to the bit where we are still supportive of this, where there are other measures that the Minister has acknowledged she will be bringing later in the year, in the autumn time, and we look to assist that where we can. So I don't see why the other aspects of this bill that are somewhat removed from the Covid-19 crisis and our response to it couldn't have been left until the autumn as well. So, I don't want to prolong the inevitable, I suppose, Catherlock, but from my perspective, I will be pushing the amendment and I will be calling a vote. Thanks, Minister.
Thank you. Minister, would you like to reply?
Sorry, look, I thank the Senator for raising this point, and again I suppose to acknowledge that this is not an ideal circumstance for us to be bringing legislation through, but what I would say, and I do feel that these measures are different, it's not just that, as Senator Ward has outlined, they are contingencies for unforeseen eventualities. These are changes, many of which have been sought, many of which have been called for some time, but that happen to also be needed in terms of trying to deal with COVID and in terms of trying to ensure that there isn't a backlog and that justice can be served, so it doesn't just benefit the judiciary and the legal profession, but also our citizens as well. So you know, I do feel that these measures will be of enormous benefit to those working and attending our courts. It's a longer term benefit, but it is needed in the short term as well. So I'm not sure what other way we could have brought these. There were obviously other pieces that could have been brought forward that weren't really relevant for now. And in terms of combating the challenges we face with COVID, we haven't brought them forward. We have only dealt with the ones that have been asked of us and that we feel will create the most amount of support for the court service. But I accept the point that you've raised, but I feel that this is absolutely necessary at this moment in time.
Thanks, Minister.
Sure, and just because we're at committee stage and the opportunity is afforded to me, I mean, look, in many ways we have a consensus here, Minister, and I just want to make the point again for the purposes of the record that this amendment won't delay any of those asks. I mean, the asks are coming. I accept totally that a lot of the asks are necessary. They're coming from within the sector. It's about assisting and freeing up backlogs and helping people working within our court system. So I have no issue with that. I don't disagree with you on that. If this amendment should pass, that would still happen. So it doesn't hinder any of that. It just, as has been articulated, gives us the opportunity to stop in the autumn and to take a look at this again. And I think in the context of, you know, the way the business is being done, understandably, okay, I concede that in the House in recent times. It wouldn't do any harm. It would be good practice for us to stop and take that breather and take that look again. But I don't disagree with you about the need for these changes. I support the need for these changes, and the amendment isn't about delaying or hindering those changes in any way.
The question is that the amendment be made. Those in favour say tá. Those against say níl. Believe it's